gurus, Tony and Scott. You'll get 2 or 3 perspectives for the questions that you submit. We do have some great questions coming in now, but there's still room for a few more. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for myself, Scott, or Tony to respond. And let's start with one from Ethel. The question is, please discuss how municipal governments can translate federally generated data into predictive models. Is qualitative research the only tool available to counties and cities to generate actionable and legislatively supported models? And I wonder if that's, if part of that question is the trade-off between accuracy and explainability. That, and Ethel, we can read your questions live here if you want to extend that question and let us know, is your main concern explainability even when you have to trade off your accuracy, or is it other? And I'll go out to Scott initially for this question. And Scott, feel free to generalize a little bit for our group, because we take people from across sectors that get a lot out of the training. The actual application veneer for vertical markets is fairly thin, and people see that as soon as we go into the methods and the like. But Scott, what would you say for, and Ethel just did get back, said, yes, accuracy is my focus for the question. So that might lead into having a basic understanding of how the various methods work and selecting the ones that allow more explainability. Would you like to extend for Ethel?
Wow, what a question. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
You're coming through clearly. For some reason, I think it's the line that I'm dialed in on. I know I'm throwing some static here, and I apologize for that. But no, you're absolutely clear.
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, it has to do with modeling qualitative data. Is that the best way to summarize it?
Yeah, and I think Ethel has to concentrate more on substantiating how she got her results, is what I'm guessing at. She says, is qualitative research the only tool available to counties and cities to generate actionable and legislatively supported models?
Well, good question. There's a whole plethora of data available. It really depends upon what your target market is. Legislatively supported, I'm assuming you're talking about consumers or people rather than institutions. So if I float it back up about another 5,000 feet, the first thing is you got to make sure you understand what your objective is. If you're just doing typical type of qualitative research, which is consumer surveys, then you're trying to achieve multiple objectives. Whenever you do a predictive model, what you want to do is, you have the greatest success if you try to achieve one objective per model. Models are not real good at achieving multiple objectives. At least your risk is higher. And second of all, I would look at, there's a whole plethora of different types of algorithms. Some are more easy to understand than others in terms of communicating results. So if the explainability portion of it is the most important factor, I might use something that apply an algorithmic technique that's easier to understand when you're communicating it. The easier it is to understand, the higher the credibility. There's some modeling techniques, most notably neural networks or support vector machines that are not so easily explainable. So I'd look for a modeling algorithm to apply that is easily explainable.
Not as fun to spend the entire evening untangling a sigmoid transfer function in the hidden layer of a neural network, huh?
You got it.
Isn't geek humor great? Tony, anything to extend?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'd like to add to that from the experience, can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're coming through great.
Okay, sorry. The one thing that I'd like to actually add to that is that government and business is very similar, but the big issue that I see with the projects that I've been involved with in a governmental environment, and as Scott mentioned, is really getting a clear statement of what our objectives are and what our performance metrics are so that we can work on enhancing those. And in many cases, it's not ROI. And as we were talking about a little bit during our segment, I think the one thing that really needs to be maintained on top of that is the ability to take on these smaller chunked projects, because our business objectives and performance metrics do change, along with legislative and political considerations that are involved in the projects. But they still have to come back into some type of a measurable form of a performance metric, so that we do have a clear understanding of what behaviors specifically we are trying to model, and in many cases taking this idea back to the fact that what we're really doing is resource allocation. Even the governments have limited time, limited budgets available, and we can be more effective in achieving our goals and enhancing our performance when we have a clear statement of exactly what those scarce resources are, what kind of behaviors from the folks that we are modeling impact those performance metrics when they display more or less of that behavior, and really just in this very agile environment, allowing for rapid development, a great deal of flexibility, using the incremental design types of considerations in government, I think, is just as important as it is in the business environment.
Great points, and also to point out it's not always about ROI, particularly in the public sector. It's more about accomplishing a mission. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Ethel came back and said yes with an explanation point. So I think you targeted her question both very well. Fantastic. Wanted to move on to a question that, well, actually that participant just had to go. Reading that off the screen here. We'll get to that question. I certainly want to hit questions while we still have some participants. It's 5 after the hour, so some are having to drop off. We understand that. I'm going to change a little bit here to address questions for those who are still in attendance. This question from Mafu is, do you have data mining training exclusively for higher education? Not exclusively. Those from higher education do come to our public events, I think, for that practical, pragmatic perspective and strategic perspective for predictive analytics. And we are putting together a new relationship with an organization that does push out commercial training through universities around the nation. So if you would make sure to sign up for our data mining newsletter, you'll have an email that will come out after this event that will invite you to that. Sign up for the newsletter, and that when that relationship is established, it'll be announced in the newsletter. That'll keep you apprised. Let's see, Matt, can you provide a list of the data points that we should be tracking? Can you provide a list of the data points we should be tracking? Well, this time it's Tony's turn to go first, and I guess to lead into this, I know there's a fat data perspective that you'll want to express, but I would say, can you provide a list of data points? Absolutely, but after we've looked at the context of your environment, align the objectives of your full project team, explore your available data and any data enrichment that might be available and the like. Tony, what would you like to say to Matt as far as constructing a list of data points for track?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry, Matt. I'm going to take this from the idea that there are a number of issues related to the data, and we actually spend a good portion of our class time talking about those data-related issues in different types of projects. There's really essentially 2 types of projects that we work on. We're either estimating a value or estimating a category on our outcomes, and how we treat our what a statistician would call the independent variables, or our input variables into our model, is going to be different depending on the structure of the output. There are a number of issues. We've touched on a few today and how to deal with them, but around data representation schemes, about selecting data, about data transformations, normalizing data so that we have something closer to a normal distribution, because that's what our algorithms prefer. What data is applicable, what fields are applicable, all of the different pieces and parts. A good portion of the course material is involved with actually going through and how we deal with those data related issues in different parts and different types of problems that we're working on. I'm hoping that's what you meant by data points.
Sure. And Scott, would you like to extend?
Yeah, I will. And I'm going to answer it a little bit differently by talking about the nature of predictive analytics and data mining to begin with. When we compare what we do today with the classical scientific process, in the scientific process we would form a hypothesis and go out and collect data. Today that's kind of flip-flopped. We really, in most organizations, have more data than we can handle, and our objective is not to, or our task is not to go out and collect data, but rather to figure out which data that we already have is relevant to the objective that we're trying to meet. So it's a little bit of a different process. Scientific method, you go collect data. Data mining, you already got data, and generally it's more than that's applicable to the problem that you're trying to solve.
That's a great perspective. And with that, let's do one more question. Arun asks, well, if either of you can speak to this, I cannot. How is the Asia market doing in data mining, if either of you have a perspective? And the follow-up is, what are the usual do's and don'ts in data mining and predictive analytics projects? Obviously, I mean, the webinar was all about that, so we offered a lot of tips tactically and strategically, but I think we can do kind of a recap, and probably the biggest would be not to start without an overarching process model, one that starts in with looking at business issues and data issues well before you look at tools or digging into the data. With that started off, Scott, would you like to recap anything from the webinar, and if you know anything about the Asia market?
I'll start in reverse order. I know that the Asian market is very strong. I have an informal network that consists of thousands and thousands and thousands of data miners and data science people from all over the world. And the Asian market, most specifically India, of course, has always been in the forefront of it, and is pretty much taking the ball and running with it and going even stronger. In terms of demand, I can't talk a whole lot about it. I did read an article today that was talking about European retail, which is a neighbor, is very strong. I don't even know how to answer the first part of it, other than to suggest it's not something that you can encapsulate in one or two sentences. There's a whole linkage of things that are important. And in any data mining or predictive analytics project, you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. So it's important to get a good basic overview of the process and the things that are important. And quite honestly, the things that are important are not what most people think are important. Right. So I guess that's my pitch of a way of saying, sign up for the course.
That's true. Well put. I don't mind the plug either. And I think that relates to the rocket. When people think of a mission to space, they think, well, let's start getting the pieces and the technology together to build a rocket. And that's how we advertise this event. And so they start putting together a rocket, and because of modern software and the analytical tools that are available, even business practitioners with not a lot of background in mathematics can build a pretty darn good rocket. And then they discover, well, we didn't have a mission plan, and we can launch it into space, but what are we supposed to do when we get out there, and what are we supposed to return with? And that's why we thought that was really good for the event. But that's another point of emphasis, I think, as far as where to get started, is don't just take that tactical view, or else you will end up with more than adequate models that answer the wrong questions or don't achieve results for a number of strategic reasons. Tony, anything else to cap before we wrap it up?
The only thing I'd like to add to that is I have been doing some work in Asia in the last few years, and we're seeing a growth there. I don't think it's Asia in particular. It is very strong, Hong Kong, Singapore, Seoul, Tokyo, Indo-Australia, a little bit in Manila, with just some people that I'm familiar with. I think what's differentiating, so kind of combining both aspects, it's not geographically based, but the companies that are actually being successful with this are realizing that it is not a technology solution. This is not about the right algorithm or the right piece of software. This is about solving business problems, and they're putting together project teams that are actually capturing the business issues and then figuring out which technologies help them make better decisions from a business perspective, rather than looking for a technology solution and trying to figure out what business might be able to use it. And if you look at even historically, the poster child analytics organizations, companies like Google and Yahoo and Facebook and all of the people that at Amazon that are commonly talked about, they started with the idea for a business and said, analytics makes sense for this. And this is where a lot of organizations that are being successful are really starting with the idea this is a business problem. Now, how do we use the IT capabilities we have that are rapidly growing, and how do we use these analytic techniques to more effectively solve our problems? And I think there are a number of organizations, especially in the Pacific Rim, that are grasping that potentially a little bit more quickly than some of the American Fortune 500 based organizations that tend to be looking for technology solutions rather than innovating the way they're thinking and approaching solving business problems. So I would say that's the major organizational difference that I've seen, and really what separates the folks that are using analytics well versus those that are trying to figure out how to make analytics work.
Well, that was educational for me as well, from both you and Scott, to get that perspective from the Asian markets. And I think it's almost surprising that there's not more vendors out there, whether it's service or product, that are putting more emphasis on the strategic aspects. Now, I understand software, just like you said at the beginning of your presentation, Scott. Software can't, understand your business problem, and it can only do what we would do otherwise more efficiently, and save us the labor of the complex mathematics. But the fact that there's not even more books or courses, we seem to be the vendor, and we enjoy it, the sole vendor that really concentrates on the strategic aspects of predictive analytics. And I think it's almost amazing that the market doesn't have more in that way, after how much time that the market has had to get learning lessons and build scar tissue from all of that. Scott, is there anything you'd like to add in that regard before we wrap up?
I think everything's been covered very well. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else, Tony?
No, nothing for me. Thank you for your time, and for everybody who stuck around through the Q&A. We appreciate your attendance today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Very good, both. And we're at about a quarter after the hour. We had great retention through the standard content, and for the first couple of questions, and a number of people had to drop off, probably because we were at the top of the hour. We don't even ask people to stick around for the overtime on the Q&A, although most do. But we did have a number that left after that, and then about a half of those stuck around for the remainder of the Q&A. We do appreciate that, but at a quarter after the hour, we're going to draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your very active participation in the polls, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments, and of course your valuable and entertaining Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope you'll offer permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. Remember that you can save 10% on your Orlando Course Series registration if you sign up by Monday, or 20% off the Los Angeles production if you register by January 27th. Now, if you would like to benefit from your early efforts instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive on the online registration form, and don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Wire Support program. Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll or administrating complicated contracts or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on the next time you need us. And meanwhile, When we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the wire support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.